This is Mac OS Ken.
An argumentative look at Apple earnings. It is Friday, the 28th of October, 2022. I'm Ken Ray, and this is news from Mac OS Ken, brought to you by yours truly and sponsored by Trade Coffee. Get $30 off your subscription plus free shipping at drinktrade.com/MacOSKen. This show is also supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/MacOSKen. I don't want to argue, but I think I'm probably going to. Actually, that's not how I should start. I should start by saying, as Apple did in its press release, that the company posted a September quarter record revenue of $90.1 billion, up 8% year over year, and quarterly earnings per diluted share of $1.29, up 4% year over year. Annual revenue was $394.3 billion, up 8% year over year, and annual earnings per diluted share were $6.11, up 9% year over year. Now we can go to the part where I don't want to argue, but I'm probably going to anyway. I read a Gizmodo story after Apple's earnings report Thursday night that came under the headline, Apple's record revenues soured by worse than expected iPhone sales. I didn't hear that on the call, but of course Apple does not say whether what it's reporting beats analyst expectations. Sometimes they don't even say whether they beat their own expectations. The only mention of expectations I remember from the call is when Apple CEO Tim Cook said that customer demand for iPhone last quarter was strong and better than Apple itself anticipated that it would be. As far as disappointment, the only mention of anything emotional I remember from the analyst side was the opposite. That's when Citigroup analyst Gentleman Jim Suva offered congratulations for Apple's team. Doesn't sound like they missed his expectations. And yet the Gizmodo piece says lower than expected iPhone sales suggest there may be holes in the ship in need of patching. I'm skipping straight to the argument, and I shouldn't. It was a record quarter for Apple by many visible metrics. By geography, the company set September quarter revenue records in the Americas, Europe, Greater China, and the rest of the Asia-Pacific region. The company set September quarter revenue records for iPhone and the wearables, home, and accessories category, a segment in which more than one analyst expected to see weakness. Let us lope through business segments, starting with iPhone. iPhone revenue came in at $42.6 billion. As mentioned before, that was a September quarter record, up 10% versus the roughly $38.9 billion Apple reported for the same quarter a year earlier. Shout out by Apple CFO Luca Maestri for iPhone's strength in emerging markets like India, where the phone set a new all-time revenue record, as well as up-and-comers such as Indonesia, Mexico, Thailand, and Vietnam, all of which saw a doubling of iPhone business versus the same quarter a year earlier. Across the board, the quarter saw a record number of iPhone upgraders and double-digit growth for switchers. Sounds like a quarter soured by worse than expected iPhone sales. Moving to the Mac. Apple's, according to Hoyle Computer, saw revenue of $11.5 billion, up 25% versus the roughly $9.2 billion for the same quarter a year earlier. CFO Maestri said the rise was driven by three factors: the launch of the M2-powered MacBook Air and MacBook Pro, meeting demand that had carried over from the June quarter, and being able to fill the channel thanks to an improved supply position. As they say almost every time, the CFO said about half the people buying Macs last quarter were new to the platform. Adding a bit of color, creative strategies principal Ben Beharin pointed out on Twitter that based on Mac sales estimates, Apple added as many new Mac customers this quarter as the average quarterly number of Macs from a few years ago. He figures that to be about 4 to 5 million new users. On now to iPad, which was Apple's weakest link. Revenue for that came in at $7.2 billion, down about 13% versus the $8.25 billion reported for the same quarter a year earlier. Foreign exchange headwinds and a bad compare were the culprits, according to the CFO. Apple launched new iPads in the September quarter of 2021, something they did not do last quarter. Despite the weakness, Apple's tablet hit its highest installed base so far, and once again, over half the people who bought an iPad last quarter were new to the device. Surprising strength seen in Apple's wearables, home, and accessories category. The company reported revenue of $9.7 billion there, up 10% versus last year's roughly $8.8 billion, and setting a September quarter record. The numbers were no doubt helped by the range of new Apple Watch models introduced last quarter. Huge growth for the chronometer, with 2/3 of people buying an Apple Watch last quarter doing so for the first time. On now to Apple services. Revenue for that segment hit about $19.2 billion last quarter, up from the roughly $18.3 billion reported for the same quarter a year earlier. Not huge growth, but growth in a time of macroeconomic headwinds, including less than favorable foreign exchange rates. While CFO Maestri noted softness in digital advertising and gaming, there were plenty of positives to point out. For starters, the growth of the hardware installed base across each geographic segment and each major product category lays a foundation for future services growth. The company noted increased customer engagement with its services. Both transacting accounts and paid accounts grew double digits year over year, according to Maestri, with each setting a new all-time record. The company now handles more than 900 million paid subscriptions. That's up 155 million in the last 12 months and double the number they had just 3 years ago. Now, something that kind of knocked me sideways on Thursday, while trumpeting future growth potential for Apple's services segment, CFO Maestri said that segment is already the size of a Fortune 50 business. I kind of messed this up on Friday's Daily Observations podcast from the Mac Observer. I knew that a Fortune list comprised the top U.S. companies in terms of something. I couldn't remember whether it was revenue or earnings. According to Wikipedia, the Fortune 500 is an annual list compiled and published by Fortune magazine that ranks 500 of the largest U.S. corporations by total revenue for their respective fiscal years. So if Apple broke services off into its own business, it would be the size of a Fortune 50 company, according to Apple execs. That means services for Apple is bigger than Walt Disney at 53 on this year's Fortune 100, bigger than HP at 55, bigger than Facebook at 57, bigger than Goldman Sachs at 62. Kind of funny, since Goldman Sachs is helping Apple grow its services arm through Apple Card and other initiatives. Bigger than Cisco Systems at 64, Best Buy at 74, Oracle at 81, American Airlines, Delta Airlines, United Continental Holdings, and Apple sees room for services growth. Looking ahead, if you're looking for financial guidance, you have come to the wrong timeline. CFO Maestri did offer a bit of don't hold us to it directional insight, though. They think total company year-over-year revenue performance will slow this quarter versus the September quarter. That's thanks to a few factors, including foreign exchange headwinds, weakness for the Mac, and while the services segment is expected to grow, that growth will be hampered by foreign exchange headwinds, as well as a wobbly macro that'll likely take a toll on digital advertising and gaming. Now let's circle back to the Mac really quickly. According to CFO Maestri, the Mac is in for a really tough compare this quarter. The December quarter of 21 had the benefit of the launch and associated channel fill of the then newly redesigned MacBook Pro with M1. Some have said they expect another laptop or two from Apple before the end of this year, but Mr. Maestri says this quarter will present a tough compare for the Mac versus last year, when there was a new Mac. Additionally, in his opening remarks, Apple CEO Tim Cook said, "As we approach the holiday season with our product lineup set, I'd like to share my gratitude to our retail, Apple Care, and channel teams for the work they are doing to support customers." Saying to the listening public that the product lineup is set makes me think nothing new, hardware-wise, for the rest of this year. Others may disagree, and I would have no problem being wrong. Apple's direction insights hang by a thread, by the way, hence the "don't hold us to it" nature of the comments. According to the CFO, the directional insights are based on the assumption that the macroeconomic outlook and COVID-related impacts to Apple's business do not worsen from what they are projecting today for the current quarter. How are things in iPhone City? Yeah, maybe we shouldn't ask. Going back to where we started and revisiting argumentative me, Gizmodo was sort of starring as a mixed messenger in a script of its own writing. While the headline said Apple's record revenue soured by worse than expected iPhone sales, the article was pretty Apple positive. Still, I would argue with the iPhone sales assertion because it lacks nuance. Yes, iPhone revenue came in at $42.6 billion. That is slightly less than the $43 billion analysts expected according to the Wall Street Journal, according to Gizmodo. What it leaves out is the amount of time people are still spending waiting for an iPhone 14 Pro or an iPhone 14 Pro Max. If Apple could have caught demand, it would have likely beaten the street's expectation instead of just setting a September quarter record. Apple did what they did despite a litany of global hardships outlined by CEO Cook. Those didst and do include war in Eastern Europe, the persistence of COVID-19, climate disasters around the world, and an increasingly difficult economic environment. Fingers crossed, and to the end of the year we go. Fun with people in a moment, which is to say a short look at the call's question and answer session. First, though, a word from today's sponsor, Trade Coffee. I'm kind of sad. I finished my bag of PT's Ad Astra Signature Blend earlier this week. It was good, and now it's gone. Here's what makes me happy, though. I have a new bag coming. That's how Trade Coffee works. It is a coffee subscription service that makes it so simple for you to discover new coffees and make your best cup of coffee at home every day. Whether you have a French press, a Chemex, or a plain old drip coffee maker like me, making the best coffee starts with having the best coffee. And you can have that with Trade Coffee. Whether you're just getting started with specialty coffees or consider yourself a coffee snob, Trade guarantees you will love your first bag, or they will send you a new one for free. Get started today. Right now, Trade is offering macOS Ken listeners a total of $30 off your subscription plus free shipping at drinktrade.com/macOSKen. That's drinktrade.com/macOSKen for $30 off your subscription to coffee I am sure you are going to love. drinktrade.com/macOSKen. And thanks to Trade Coffee for sponsoring today's show. Let us now do a little bit of the question and answer thing, starting with one from Credit Suisse analyst Shannon Cross, asking a question that the Gizmodo starter seemed fine not asking. Cross wondered whether Apple could address issues of demand and pricing and other factors around the iPhone 14 line. Apple CEO Tim Cook seemed to say not really. See, demand for the top end of the line has been strong and better than they anticipated it would be. Until they have ready availability, they can't really say how the mix will be. What they can say is that iPhone accounted for 3 of the top 4 smartphones in the UK and the US last quarter, as well as the top 3 smartphones in China, the top 6 in Australia, 4 out of the top 5 in Germany, and the top 2 in Japan. So, that's cool. If I'm honest, I found a few non-answer answers a bit frustrating. Evercore analyst Amit Daryanani asked whether Apple could scale its digital ad business without sacrificing consumer privacy. Apple CEO said Apple would never sacrifice consumer privacy, and if you look at it, Apple's digital ads business is small compared to others, which doesn't really answer the question. Piper Sandler analyst Harsh Kumar asked about inflation pressures and labor problems here in the U.S. and globally. Could Apple CEO talk about what steps Apple can take to mitigate those? Maybe he could, though what he said instead was, in terms of the people piece, we're focused on taking care of our teams and offering them the best benefits and best compensation so that we can empower them to do the best work of their lives. And so that's what we're focused on in terms of our teams. Which doesn't really answer the question. I was wrong about Suva being the only analyst to express emotion, by the way. Kumar also congratulated Apple execs on the company's stellar performance. He hides his disappointment well. There were plenty more questions and comments, though those were the ones that caught my ear. If you want to hear the whole thing for yourself, I would encourage you to do so. A replay of the call is now up on Apple's investor page and will be for the next couple of weeks. It is also available as a podcast and should be for the next couple of weeks. And if you're more of a reader, thanks and mad props to the Motley Fool for posting a transcript of the call. That should be up until the internet goes dark. Scattered as that recap might have sounded, you should have heard my thinking right after the call. Oh wait, you can. Mac Observer managing editor Jeff Butts and I talked through some of the numbers and our thoughts around them on the Mac Observer's Daily Observations podcast. Find that now at macobserver.com or wherever you get podcasts. macOS Ken, brought to you by me and sponsored by Trade Coffee. Get $30 off your subscription plus free shipping at drinktrade.com/macOSKen. This show is also supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macOSKen. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media, online at backbeatmedia.com. You can reach me a couple of ways. Info at macosken.com or call 716-780-4080. Until next time, that is news from macOS Ken. I'm Ken Ray.
Ciao.